Good morning and good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today for what promises to be an informative and enlightening webinar entitled Connect Students with Future of Work-Aligned Skills. We're pleased to have with us as our presenters today, Lisa McIntyre-Height, Senior Principal at Guild Education, and Matthew Daniel, Principal Consultant at Guild Education. Dr. Lisa McIntyre-Height is a Senior Principal at Guild Education. Prior to joining Guild, she was Vice President at Pathstream and a strategic advisor for Entangled Solutions, focused on higher education futures. Lisa was the founding Dean for Competency-Based Education and Executive Director for Learning Innovation at Walden University. Her research in learning innovation has been published by the Clayton Christensen Institute and several peer-reviewed journals. Her professional passion is rooted in the desire to take measurable steps to address inequity in educational systems and to expand access to high-quality learning experiences. Matthew Daniel is a 15-year veteran of leading and consulting on talent development and L&D transformations in Fortune 100 companies such as Nike, Cigna, Microsoft, Capital One, and General Motors. As a principal consultant at Guild, he leads research and thought leadership on topics like the intersection of L&D and DEI, economic modeling for talent and skills trends, talent mobility, and the future of work. My name is Todd Bloom, and I'll serve as the moderator for this webinar. I'm the managing partner of the WGU Labs Fund, an affiliate of Western Governors University. A few housekeeping items before we begin. At any time during this live presentation, please feel free to post a question for Lisa or Matthew or both of them in the Q&A function within Zoom. I'll monitor these questions, and where applicable, I'll pose these questions to Matthew and Lisa, but we'll also reserve the last 15 or 20 minutes of the webinar for the Q&A. This event is being recorded, and the archive and presentation slides will be made available to you after the webinar. And now I'm going to hand the mic over to Lisa and Matthew. Lisa?
Thanks so much, Todd, and thank you for Inside Higher Ed for hosting Matthew and I today. And to all of the attendees, it's so great to see so many names. Wish we could see your faces or even be in person, but thank you so much for making the time to chat with us today and hear from us. And as Todd mentioned, just please use that Q&A function. We want to keep this as conversational as possible as we go through today. But as Todd mentioned, Matthew is, Matthew, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to kind of call you my partner in crime on the other side of the house. So where I'm bringing some higher ed experience and expertise, Matthew Daniel really keeps us honest in terms of what workforce is looking for, the kinds of skills that they need. And he also keeps me from sounding too academic from time to time, which I do appreciate, Matthew. And so I do just want to take a minute and preview for you a bit of our agenda and what you can expect from the time today. One of the things that we're really going to be looking at is what are our employers seeking? What are they looking for? And this is really where Matthew's going to provide a lot of expertise and insight. We'll share how Guild works with employers, but also think about skilling as a framework, particularly as skilling relates to illuminating some of the pathways to advancement. We're also going to share a little bit about what our working adult students are seeking. Let's hear from them. Let's hear what they're looking for. How do they think about the programs that they choose and how they think about their education? And last of all, we'll talk through the ways we can further come together to really meet the skilling needs and help our working adult students really unlock economic opportunity by ensuring that they're confident and fluent at communicating the skills that they're bringing to the job market, which many of us know has been a challenge for quite some time. Ultimately, this isn't just about their individual work, but also our work together as a community of educators and employers. And so, Matthew Daniel, please take it away. Excited to present with you yet again. So I'll hand it over to you.
Always. I think in the work that we do at Guild, it's so important that marketplace dynamics mean the world to us about making sure we're doing right by students and employers and our academic and learning partners. And so it is my privilege to get to speak with Lisa regularly and talk with you all today. So let me just, I get a couple minutes up front just to tell you about some of the ways that people are thinking. In the introduction, it was mentioned that I do a lot of research with our employer partners. As somebody who is a practitioner and now my job is largely to watch the market and see what employers are looking for and talking about and figure out how to make sure we meet those demands. So what you're seeing today, I think the hot topic above all in future of work is skills. And I think some of that is absolutely driven by marketing machines in a number of ed tech and learning technology platforms. But at the end of the day, it's a very, very real gap, a real challenge that employers are up against. And so we were actually walking through a client engagement on the academic side, and we were thinking about lifelong learning and what does that look like? What does the move into and out of education over time look like? And what we kept coming up against, and I'll just say as an L&D practitioner, the thing that has been prevalent now for a couple of years is the half-life of skills, the half-life of skills, the half-life of skills. We hear a lot about it. As a matter of fact, what's happened is that concept of half-life of skills has actually generated a ton of energy towards the creation of perishable content. Like you create it to throw away in L&D circles. And so all of that conversation led us to a bit of a reframe, and Lisa's really been a partner all along this journey as we started to think about it. And honestly, some of the thought coming out of the competency-based education way of thinking about things, but ultimately what has been disconcerting to me about the movement in L&D and the movement towards content that's throwaway and skills that are throwaway is that ultimately organizations are spending so much energy on content that is thrown away that we may not be making the right investment in truly durable skills that last for a really long time. So I actually published a piece in October in Chief Learning Officer magazine, and it really took hold in both the academic and the L&D circles as a way of thinking about the way we're approaching skills. That skills aren't hard or soft, they're not human or technical, but in a really meaningful way to the business when you're thinking about investments, when you're talking about developing skills as a form of investing money. The question was, is a skill durable or perishable? And the framework we use here, and framework is generous, but I'll just say the way we think about this is that if some skills are more perishable, then some skills are more durable. And if some skills are more durable, are we creating a portfolio of investment in skills that accounts for durable skills and perishable skills? And I would even go further. You see on the screen here, we have like durable skills, thinking about dispositions, the way that a learner approaches a topic, and those have a much longer shelf life. On the opposite end, you have perishable skills. These specialized skills often related to technology, these skills related to processes, business specific, they're highly perishable. And somewhere in the middle, you have knowledge-based frameworks where you start to think about, for me, I come from a background in structural design. And so ADDIE was the framework. And ADDIE lasted for a really long time, but ultimately it's a loose framework. It's more of a process. And a lot of new frameworks have come in place to replace that over recent years. And so the shelf life on those things is a bit more limited. And so the analogy that we use for this is a tree, right? Ultimately, we are really concerned about durable skills, those skills that are the roots and the trunk of the tree. They plant down deep, they keep a tree healthy in good seasons and bad seasons. They are the connection. They are the thing that keeps someone planted. Then you have these branches, these frameworks, they last longer, but ultimately they die off on the tree as well. And then you have leaves that are, in most situations, dying off every year. They sprout up, they die off, they sprout up, they die off over and over again to meet the needs of the tree, to get the nutrients into the tree. And so the conversation that we started having in the L&D circles is, are we doing the right level of investment in durable, semi-durable, and perishable skills, in disposition frameworks and those to-dos at that skill level, where we are thinking about how that plays out across a portfolio? And ultimately, and you heard Lisa's intro, thinking about matters of equity, the bigger concern for me then is, are we actually making more durable skill investments in certain populations and less durable skills or more perishable investments in other audiences? Do we take our frontline employees and concentrate our perishable skills that essentially don't create the kind of transferability? As a matter of fact, go to that next slide, because I think the slide here that we have outlined the table where we talk about the benefit to the student, because I think ultimately it's incredibly important that we're thinking about this as very much an ecosystem problem and ecosystem benefit. So the students benefit because they develop these durable, transferable, lifelong skills that go with them, the frames, the way of thinking through things. They get with semi-durable skills that industry expertise that lets them show up as a subject matter expert and grow vertically in their career through promotions. And those perishable skills that give them day-to-day relevancy by which they apply that paradigm, that way of thinking. The employers get this transferable talent. If nothing, the past year or two has shown us, we need talent that's flexible, that can go with us as the market changes and shifts. And that we need those frameworks to set all of that on about how we approach, but ultimately that a workforce also has to be agile. I think my call, since so many of you are higher ed folks, my call is to both sets of us, both in the workplace and higher ed, that we are not trying to become ubiquitous, right? It's not the role of higher ed to figure out all the perishable skills that exist in the market and teach those. That is why L&D exists inside the organization, to meet so many of those needs. At the same time, the students that come out of your programs, if they don't have some of those perishable skills that give them relevancy in the workplace when they land, they're in peril. They're in peril. The credibility of the program is in peril if they can't land with some of those applicable skills. And so coming to this really balanced approach, and as we talk with employers about this, they're really excited because they're watching the talent demand that they're going to have over coming years, and they're really anxious about their ability to buy that talent, or as we call it in HR circles, talent acquisition, recruiting. Their ability to keep up with demand is unlikely. As a matter of fact, I posted yesterday or a few days ago, the current gap in human labor right now in the US is about 3 million. That's the mismatch that we have, 3 million workers. By 2030, that's projected to be at about 6.5 million. So this thing that we're feeling right now that we assume is pandemic related, or it is more complicated and growing more complicated over time. Okay, I'm almost done here. I'll expand a little bit on that next. Yes, for someone who posted, yes, I am thinking about a blend of these skills. Sorry, I'm just going to grab that Q&A because I see it pop up on the screen. So yes, I am thinking very much about a blend of skills, but also the places where those partnerships land the skills. So I'm not thinking of any one player as necessary to deliver all across the spectrum, but instead that there is a blend of a portfolio from a learning and development spectrum as far as what the workforce needs, where there are partners like you all in the higher ed spaces who are really delivering excellence in those semi-durable and durable skills to match with the needs of the students. And so what's interesting to me, we mentioned a moment ago, I led a team last year and now into this year, really going deep on what are the needs if we look to the future, if we think about the way that there is a mismatch in the labor market and we think of the roles and what demand looks like. We started an industry by industry analysis, and we were trying to figure out what are the unique needs of each industry, and can we make sure that both we as Guild and the partners that we bring to the table have the right level of offerings all the way across to meet the needs of our students. And we got about 8 industries in, and I just called a timeout for the whole project, because ultimately what was really interesting to us was not the unique needs of every industry, it was the commonality across all industries. So of course you have certain industries that need deep expertise, healthcare, the other I would say is manufacturing. There are really specific needs, and there are specific needs in each industry, those 2 industries being where the majority of needs are unique. When we think about the vast majority, and we used MZ data in a part of that initial analysis. So we were looking at the 20 verticals that they separate out. What became interesting was not what was unique to each industry, it was what was common to each industry, how common the skills were and how common the roles were. Right. And I think one of the things that's really interesting in that workforce analysis right now is most companies went to a really skill-based analysis where they were looking at each individual skill and how they can map that across the organization. But for me at Capital One, 30,000 skills across our organization. I think at one point it got up to 33,000 skills across something like 2,800 unique roles, which is impossible. It's just impossible until the technology gets us there. And it's just not quite ready yet. And so what was more important, what has been more impactful for us as we engage with employers is not coming and talking about 30,000 skills. It's talking about the 8 to 10 to 15 roles that are most in demand in an organization and the roles that are at risk for disappearing from an organization over the next couple of years. So on the screen, what you're seeing are a couple of the roles that when we look across demand, industry after industry, for us, we put that threshold at least 50% of industry verticals, so 10 out of 20. What we saw is demand was in common across these. And so what we need to talk to employers about, and we often do an employer-specific analysis of what the trends are in their organization. When we look at it, what we see is that of the 20 highest recruited roles in any organization, at least half of those roles are also in demand of half of other industry verticals. This creates a tremendous amount of pressure, and you all have a tremendous amount of power to alleviate some of that pressure through the kind of skills that you're helping develop. So you're seeing some of those on the screen. We just have them grouped: business and financial ops, tech roles, as we all know, some kind of hodgepodge of other roles, frontline managers, HR managers, PR specialists. I think what's special about these roles is that they're aligned for the future of work. We look at an automation index for each of these roles to think about if we upskill people for them. We don't want to be highlighted in the New York Times for helping people get programs that essentially don't help them place in roles, right? That's a scary place to be. What we care deeply about is helping students get access to skills that serve them well for the future. And so when we look at these roles and we start to focus in on them, we hear employers say, like, these are places where we think we're going to continue to grow. These, we know from our research that even if that student leaves that particular employer, they have skills that are desired across other industries. And we're creating those dispositions, those durable skills and frameworks that really serve them well as they start to translate across. When we think of it, they even begin to cluster. So you may not use the name specifically. Yeah, go ahead, there you go. They may not use the name either in your class or in the employer in the job description when they talk about them, but we see things like communications start to cluster around things like organization, presentation, clear and concise writing. We see leadership start to coalesce around, yes, communications, which include those ones that I talked about a moment ago, but also critical thinking, decision-making, empathy. These are important skills that you all help develop in students that help serve them well in the workplace. And finding that common language, Lisa and I spend a lot of time on the phone saying, you're saying this word, that's not how we define it on the workforce side. Can you tell me more about what that means? And finding out that there is so much commonality between us when we create space for the dialogue, where we understand what the common needs are, the common language is. Sometimes it just feels like we literally need a Rosetta Stone between industries to help us understand the differences. But I think as we look at it, we really see our students in a position, as long as they're pursuing these programs where we know there's future work alignment, where employers are really excited about the opportunities in front of them.
Matthew, just a quick question. There was a question earlier about entrepreneurial skills and referencing that roughly 20% of the working population is entrepreneurs. I don't know whether it's 18, 20%, what have you, but where do you see entrepreneurial skills? Maybe it's across some of these different categories or clusters?
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, I'll talk about it. You all know for Guild, we partner with employers. And so that 20% of the population that's entrepreneurial and starting their own business is not typically the area of focus that we have with our employer partners. It doesn't mean they shouldn't have those skills. Like, go develop those skills. It would serve any employer to have employees who are, the frame that we often use is entrepreneurial inside the workplace, where we're trying to help figure out how to spin up new products and lines of business within a company. But ultimately, I think the entrepreneurial, if we broke that cluster down of entrepreneurial skills, we would see a lot of the crossover for even some of the items that you're seeing on the screen now. So I think that's a really healthy area of focus. It's rare that you're going to have an employer list entrepreneurial skills as something that they're trying to develop as a result of the, they're trying to keep and maintain employees rather than see them go in most instances.
Matthew, and a related question around small business, since many of our employers are classified as small businesses, are they looking for something that's even more unique or different than a larger, Fortune 1000 companies looking for in terms of skills?
Yeah, I tend to think they aren't. I think living in ed tech, I get to connect a lot with startups, with smaller startups especially. And as I connect with my peers in smaller organizations, what I see are a lot of commonalities in the types of skills that they're looking for. There are places where they're outsourcing, to shared services, to other kind of boutique firms, things like their accounting or their service, some of their services. But I think some of the same area of focus in product and technology is some of what we're seeing in small businesses as well. So I do think there's a lot of commonality between them. Other questions, Todd, that we want to capture here before we actually turn it over to Lisa to talk a bit more?
I think we're good to move ahead. There's some questions that we can maybe save or reserve towards the end. Excellent.
Lisa, why don't I turn it back over to you?
Sounds great. Sounds great. Thank you so much, Matthew, for kind of that overview. And I'm excited to share some learner perspectives and some ways that we've seen education partners really kind of bridge this gap with the durable, semi-durable, and perishable skills and looking at that employer alignment. But what we know is that when we talk to our working adult students about how they think about skilling and their perspectives, what we find is that our adult learners kind of intuitively happen to know what they're looking for, what they need, but they might not know what the process would look like or what skills specifically they should be looking for. And their needs aren't really utilitarian in the way that many companies are, right? Like they're not just looking for this discrete skill all the time. And through surveys and interviews with our learner population, we really found that while virtually everyone is seeking upward economic mobility, we do know that they're looking for growth opportunities in general, and they're not always just looking for that single career path, that one path to be a data analyst, for example. They're looking for multiple potential futures. And so if we go to the next slide, for our learners, it truly is both and. It is not either or. Do I get skills, or do I get just kind of the latest, most perishable things, or do I get durable? Do I look for a degree, or do I look for a boot camp? We really see that it's both and. For students being able to apply their skills flexibly across multiple potential futures or potential careers really goes hand in hand with the aspiration to achieve that economic mobility that we talk about. So these transferable and durable skills are really critical. And we know that those durable skills are typically what higher ed does well. And there was a question earlier in the chat that said, what is employers' motivation to invest in those durable skills when those take longer to develop? And so Matthew, I do just want to pause. I want to share kind of my 2 cents on that, but would love for you to jump in as well, because I think there's often this perception that employers just want those quick hits, like what's the thing I need right now, get to the next thing. But what we see is employers investing in full degree programs that typically, can be where you develop those durable skills. And so from my perspective, where I sit in the conversations that I've had, I find that our employers are really interested in developing those durable skills for multiple reasons. But one in particular is really, it helps with employee retention. And so if they're really sticking it out with that degree program and with one of our employer partners, that employer is really going to see a return on investment in terms of the time that learner or that employee is in market. But Matthew, would just love your perspective on that before I move into a little bit more of the survey data.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on it. I think there's clearly retention. I think the way that they're perceived in communities is really important. 5 years ago, we may not have talked about that employee value proposition or employee experience as the crux of it, but as the talent market gets tighter, the way that employers are perceived by their employees matters a lot. And so it changes the quality of hires that they get to make. And so they're really interested in making those investments because it also sets them up with an employee experience that matters. And then I'll just re-emphasize again, talent acquisition costs. That ultimately employers are looking at, a great example is information security. There are not enough InfoSec professionals out in the market. There aren't enough in pipeline from universities for the needs that they have. And so this is you can't headhunt long enough to find the talent. You're going to have to develop these really durable skills in the way that you approach. If there's a perishable facet to InfoSec, there's a large durable skill set to information security approaches to things, solving problems in InfoSec. And so employers know they cannot hire that talent. They have to develop internally. And for other roles where there isn't quite that constraint, they also see it as a means of accelerating access to underrepresented talent that sits on their front line in leadership positions in the future. Again, as more organizations are trying to ramp up talent acquisition for underrepresented populations, why not invest that same internal? And that is stimulating a lot of dialogues that we are having with employers, where they are trying to make an investment in their own frontline employees because they know long-term it offsets the talent acquisition costs that they would have.
Thanks so much, Matthew, for kind of circling back to that durable skill piece. But I do think that, for what we know is that those durable skills are really critical, but students aren't always sure, like, how are they going to get them? What programs might equip them with those competencies? How do they articulate them? But one thing that we do know coming out of the pandemic in particular, where so many have faced kind of job uncertainty, is that since COVID, more of our prospects have specific career goals in mind. And so we surveyed over 1,600 prospective and current students about how they think about their career goals and career pathing as it relates to program choice. And post-COVID leads show an increase in targeted learning, meaning that students say they have a specific career in mind, whereas the majority of students, current students surveyed, say they want more flexibility. And it's important to note that this isn't like a static perspective. You might start out with a specific career goal in mind. As you progress through your program, or you go through you learn some new skills, you realize that there are other ways to apply those skills that maybe hadn't been on the radar previously. And of our current students, we do tend to see an emphasis placed on flexibility go up, and that targeted emphasis go down as they develop some of those more durable skills over time. And so if we can go to the next slide, to really be able to deliver on kind of the both and for our learners, the short form targeted programs, but also those programs that really help learners develop those more durable skills, we really need to show flexibility and kind of bake in the systems that acknowledge that all types of learning count and allow students to stack their learning to a credential, because we know that that degree is still the #1 proxy for economic mobility long-term. Even though we hear things about the degree not being relevant, we just don't see that yet. And I think that kind of gets back to an earlier comment that I saw, which is, are we talking about a blend of durable, semi-durable, and perishable? And I think from both of our perspectives, Matthew, correct me if I'm wrong, the answer is not only yes, but we have to create the systems that enable for that to still be stackable and still count toward the degree. And so if we think about an employer provides training, on-the-job training in supply chain, maybe in data analytics with a very specific program and a specific process. And those very well may be perishable skills, because in a year they're going to update, in a year they're going to change. And how are we looking at the right stackable pathways to look at high quality training programs, things that are happening on the job, boot camps that learners might look to for those perishable skills, and ensure that we're creating kind of those stackable to those more durable skills that we were talking about earlier. I want to just provide an example of this to kind of bring it home before we kind of start to open it up a little bit more for some Q&A. But this is just a sample career trajectory where some of those perishable skills can help propel that frontline worker into the next role and get them on their path up. And so the durable skills are truly, if you look at this example, what kind of make this applicant or this person shine along the way, right? And so we have someone who maybe started as a bank teller, high risk of automation. They developed some perishable skills. They learned Python, they learned SQL, but they're also developing these durable skills along the way. And sure, that perishable skill might get you to your next job, that's going to lead to that economic mobility that you're seeking. But it just might not be enough to get you to being a product manager, a chief tech officer, or an entrepreneur like we talked about earlier. And so that's really where there's this interplay or blending of the perishable, semi-durable, and durable skills that we talk about. If we go to the next slide. Thank you. We do just want to kind of take a look at an example of a durable cluster and kind of walk through that, and appreciate all the questions that are coming in as well. We're going to pause here in just a moment to be able to answer some of these questions that are coming in. But we know that employers value agility. Many of us have been hiring partners, and we want to make sure that we're able to hire and promote people who are able to understand, react to data, evolve with changing business needs, and truly be agile. And we know that one way employers might gauge whether or not someone is agile, a durable skill that's kind of hard to quantify sometimes, is that they might, make data-driven decisions, or, seamlessly transition between tasks. And so what we've done is we've kind of looked at those skills clusters that might lead to someone demonstrating agility as a competency. And then really what we do is we recommend kind of breaking down those skills clusters to think about, like, how might we as educators start to really achieve that outcome, help learners develop that skill cluster, but not only develop it, but demonstrate that skill in some sort of assessment as well.
I just wanted to interrupt real quick to ask a question. I think that may have been better in the last slide, but a question around liberal arts. Like you mentioned that perhaps, boot camps and so forth can help develop people's, whether they're durable or potentially perishable in some cases, skills. But is there a unique case for liberal arts colleges in terms of helping students develop durable skills?
Absolutely. I mean, and so when I think about the boot camp pieces, right, I'm thinking about some of the more perishable skills, right? Like someone who's just going to come in and teach you the latest in Asana so you can be a better project manager, for example. When I think about the value of our liberal arts education, I do think that's where that durable skills cluster comes in. But there's really awesome examples of liberal arts schools that are doing both. And so I think about Davidson, small liberal arts school that also incorporated some tech training into their liberal arts programs. And if I was an employer, I would be chomping at the bit to get these people who have the durable skills that liberal arts degree, that critical thinking that liberal arts degree provides, on top of the tech training and the kind of perishable training that might be needed. And I think what we're seeing is that those folks are finishing their liberal arts degrees and going on into career fields that they probably really didn't imagine themselves in to begin with, potentially, as they go into that role. And so the answer is yes, I do think there's a very unique and special niche for our liberal arts schools. That being said, this is the CBE or competency-based ed side of me speaking here. All of our liberal arts institutions, many do this already, but some don't, need to transparently say, these are the skills that you have developed through your liberal arts education. Here are the assessments that you did along the way, the projects, the service learning that helped you demonstrate those skills. So that way, when people leave their liberal arts education, they can then speak to the skills that they have that are going to be relevant and needed on the job.
Mm-hmm.
We are on to the next slide. So let me just I'm going to walk through this and then we can open it up for more questions, but Todd, please jump in as well if there's additional ones. I just want to kind of walk through what this looks like in practice. And there's also really great examples, by the way, from Open Skills Network that we see as they've tried to kind of distill out some of these skills and get us to a shared taxonomy. But as we think about translating something like agility into demonstrable, measurable outcomes, we kind of break these out into perhaps some course objectives. Can I use data to prioritize and adjust project plans and deliverables? Can I present information clearly and concisely? And when those become the course outcomes, if you will, or the competencies that you measure that all kind of lead to being able to demonstrate your ability to be agile, you can create proof points or assessments that help students show and even build their own confidence and their ability to speak to, wow, yes, I actually can use data to prioritize and adjust a project plan or a deliverable. Here's a clear example of when I've done that. And in addition, those formative pieces that happen in the classroom, right? Talk to your colleagues about a time where you had to make a change in plans because of a new business need, or maybe even some of the quizzes that you might take. There's a way to actually build in these formative assessments to help you build toward that kind of summative assessment that will help you demonstrate that competency. And when we think about kind of those course outcomes and course overviews that so many of us are used to, if we go to the next slide, when we give this level of thought to our courses and to our course design, and we connect the competencies gained in a course program to the skills that employers are seeking and students want to gain, that's really, from my perspective, where our magic can happen, right? That's when we can really impact a student's ability to communicate what they've learned and show how they will apply it on the job. And so this is just an example where the color-coded skills kind of connect to a job description, and just really being able to pull that out. I think so often we put these things in a course description or in a syllabus, but we never really spend the time equipping our students with the ability to speak to the skills that they've developed. And that's definitely something that, that I think we can all improve upon as we continue to kind of refine and develop courses that really help meet those needs.
Lisa, there's also sorry to interrupt again, but there's also a question that takes this conversation one step further, from a gentleman named Tim. It said, job applicants' true capabilities often don't match the skills listed on their resume or their transcripts. And so the question is, how can higher ed help connect qualified workers to good jobs? How might we weight employers place on degrees, the weight they place on degrees compared to the actual, let's say, internship or work experience? So it's a kind of truth in advertising. What I say on my resume, how does the employer know that they actually have those skills?
Yeah, I'm going to just give an example from a previous life when I was a dean at a university. And I think there's kind of two things at play in this question. One is, oftentimes, even for entry-level roles that require a bachelor's degree, you will see work experience, 1 to 2 years of work experience. What does that look like? And so I think as much as institutions are able to embed some true kind of service learning or work-based projects, that's really going to kind of help, at least in that regard. I think the other piece to this, and pardon me because I'm trying to find the question as well, so I can make sure that I answer the first part of Tim's question, and I think I just lost it. I did, it's gone. The first part of that question was around what else higher ed can do. Is that right, Todd? Can you refresh my memory? Thank you.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and so I also think the other piece to this is something that I always have called performance-based assessments, right? So really making sure that those assessments are clearly aligned. But Matthew, we've talked about this before. In the employer world, you don't call them performance-based, you call them job.
Yeah, job task and oh, help me. We just did this.
We did. Just
yes.
talk about this.
Hold on, I'm going to think about it. I'll come back.
So there's a different language that's used in corporate L&D, but really what we mean is the same thing. Like, how can you take this competency, like use data to pivot your project plan and actually apply it to an employer setting? And so getting back to the example, when we would bring employers to the table for true curriculum design assistance, not just for advisory board sign off, we would say, what is the artifact that you would want to see that can prove that that student can use data and pivot and make new adjustments to their plan? And believe it or not, they would tell us. And sometimes they would even give us the case studies and give us the examples. And so I think that's where, of course, they would mask important proprietary data, but that's really where I think we can at least start to bridge that gap. Instead of you giving me a 3 to 5 page paper that describes the theories you might have used, how do we actually get to how did you use those theories to actually create a deliverable that's going to matter to that employer in the hiring process?
And Lisa, I want to weigh in on two things. I think if you haven't had the privilege of interviewing for an employer-based job, of like a corporate job, we use an interviewing technique that's called essentially performance-based interviewing or experience-based interviewing, where we expect you to tell stories. that relate to that work. And I think when you give a project instead of a paper, what you enable your students to do is to tell a story about work they've created that gets them further along in an interviewing process, or lets employers take account of that work as legitimate. I'm putting in quotes for those who are just listening and not watching. I want to make sure you saw that, as legitimate means of proving their experience with a skill. I want to take the other half of Tim's question, which was about how much weight do employers place on degrees compared to actual work internship experience. Degrees continue to be a flag. Now, I'm just going to say I write a lot about letting the skills rather than the degree be the flag, the indicator. But ultimately, right now, there's still almost all employers are using degrees as the signal about the ability to come and perform a job. How much do they take into account actual work and internship experience? A lot. There is a lot of weight put behind an internship. And if you have a degree and work experience, of course, it's the best of both worlds. But I would just say, Tim, I think there are those of us who are advocating for a different understanding of what people are bringing out of programs as skills, and opening up to a concept of letting workers come in based on skills and not just degrees, but then finding a way to quickly use degrees and credentials as a means of upskilling once they land in more particular areas where there are opportunities. So I think there are lots of ways to mix and match this, going back to interoperability that Lisa described earlier, where we give credit for experience and work that's happened before, and we continue to find new ways. Upskilling is just growing over time, and we have lots of opportunities here.
Lisa and Matthew, there's another question. I find this really intriguing. Can you address the future of the flipped transcript as it pertains to work-aligned skills?
Todd, you were reading my mind, because I saw that question. Was like, I think that's another really great way to think about how higher ed can kind of help bridge this gap. And so when we think about a comprehensive learner record that doesn't just show sociology 101, marketing 410, what happens when we have a transcript or a learner record that shows the various trainings they've completed? What happens when we have a transcript that doesn't show courses, but actually shows the competencies and maybe even links to artifacts that learner has created? I think that's where we can get to a more meaningful transcript process, and probably a more meaningful way to convey to employers and empower learners to actually speak to their skills versus just a transcript verification of a degree. But Matthew, I think that's very much a higher ed. The comprehensive learner record or comprehensive learning and employment record is something that I've seen really driven from the higher ed side. I'd be really curious from your perspective, the employer demand or interest in that as well.
There is a lot of interest in getting to more granular insights based on what you do, not just what you've learned. So in the workplace, there's been a movement around a framework called XAPI and the Learning Record Store, LRS, as the means of doing that. And I'm in Nashville, Tennessee. So the folks who are really driving that here, a company called Watershed, I get to see them up close. And there is a growing cohort of employers who are looking at that. But this is another example of where there is differing work happening on both sides of the aisle to try and figure out how to more accurately capture that data. But what I can say without a doubt is that employers are very focused on talking about what you can do, not just the course you've gone to. I think the interoperability of that language and talking about those things, and the volume of that, right? Because once you go to that, you are talking about skills where you end up with hundreds or thousands of statements about what a learner can do. The complexity grows as you do that, which we're going to have to figure out.
Todd, do you want to, we have a discussion question, but we have so many questions in the Q&A that I am happy for us to stop screen sharing and just continue to answer some of the questions from the audience. And then we can save the discussion, but defer to you as our moderator.
Yeah, I know you have a Slido question that you wanted to ask, but I'm happy to just jump into the Q&A here.
There's so many good questions in here. I think it would be good for us to get to their questions versus our discussion. So.
For sure. So question, can you speak to examples of industry recognized stackable credentials offered within a degree program, such as cybersecurity or advanced manufacturing and so on?
I can share a couple examples, and this is based on my work at Pathstream Education, but there's lots of different providers here. But Pathstream is a provider who has industry recognized certificates that they offer, industry recognized credentials. So Blueprint is used in their digital marketing program. So Blueprint is really the program that Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat uses for digital marketing. And so it includes Blueprint certification. They have a CRM program that embeds Salesforce certification. And they have university partners that then use that content and have stacked it into either a standalone certificate that then stacks into their degree program. In some cases, it stacks directly into a full degree program. So it's not just to the certificate, it can go just straight to the degree. And in some cases, it's actually offered through a professional development arm at a university or continuing education arm, but the institution has internally articulated that learning back over to the for-credit side of the house. And so kind of three ways that I've seen that work. And then I think one of the questions becomes, if a learner, at that point, you've created an inflection point for a learner, right? Do I take this industry recognized data analytics certificate that has a branding with Tableau? Do I go take that and go get a job? Or do I go take that and continue with my degree? And so I think that's where the supports, it's like creating the stackable pathways is a lift, don't get me wrong, but figuring out how we support learners through that decision process, I think is probably the place that gets really tough for at least institutions to truly figure out kind of what success looks like. Can success look like stopping and getting a job and eventually coming back, or is success only measured by the degree and its completion? So that's definitely my 2 cents. Matthew, any thoughts there?
Nothing to add there. Can I take a different question here?
Sure.
I'm going to grab Sean's question, because Sean asked that question twice in 2 different ways. And so I just want to give credence to this. Sean, if you're looking at the data from employers right now, this concept of intercultural competence is not necessarily coming up in the data just yet. If you're talking to employers live, this conversation is all over the place, right? So employers care deeply about, and I would agree with you, I think it is a durable skill. I think as we face an increasingly, and hopefully a more diverse workforce and diverse projects and initiatives and solutions, and like I'm excited about what that brings to us in the way of innovation and new things for the future. I think the importance of being able to navigate that. I'm a really big fan in the L&D and HR space. There is a firm called Red Thread Research, and they actually have a whole set of research they're in the middle of right now on skills, the intermatching of skills and DE&I. What are the skills required for driving diversity, equity, and inclusion in an organization? It's fascinating to watch how many of those intercultural competencies are actually base things like empathy and communication, and a number of those like core pieces of how to communicate. It's just in a slightly different context. So I would agree there's very durable skills, and there's some that need to be developed. And I think employers are going to increasingly look to higher ed institutions to help them bring along staff that knows how to work in a more complex workplace with lots of people from lots of different backgrounds.
Thanks, Matthew, for digging in on that one. That has been a bit of a theme in several of the questions here. Lisa, maybe a quick question or with a quick answer. What percentage, and I just lost it, what percentage of the stackable credentials do you know of being credit bearing? So you're kind of getting credit for those during your program.
So for Pathstream in particular, I don't have any data on that, but I will say, and even broadly national landscape, I'm not sure, but it would be an interesting data point to know how many stackable credentials are credit bearing. That being said, part of my responsibilities at Guild is really looking at how do we create those stackable pathways from non-traditional providers, boot camps, et cetera, and asking our institutions to review, working with ACE on review. And I will share that I feel like there's more openness. And I don't have anything other than qualitative anecdotal data here to share. But as I talk to many of our institutional partners, they really are more open than I've seen in the past 10 years to looking at content from third-party providers and still vetting it against their quality standards and still using similar criteria to ACE, but really taking a look and saying, yes, this counts. And I really credit a lot of the work that's happened at Lumina Foundation in terms of just really looking at credential as you go. What does it mean to actually get so many of these working adults who do not have degrees through to completion so we can impact economic mobility? I really feel like it's been a movement that's been long in the making, but I've just seen more openness to it, but don't have hard stats, sorry to say.
Another question, do industries see any value to a job candidate having an e-portfolio? We knew this question would be coming, right? The concept of an e-portfolio, and we kind of hearkened to it a little bit earlier in terms of performance-based artifacts of learning and skill-based artifacts and so forth. But what's your take on e-portfolios, the technology, and that do industries even value seeing something like that from candidates?
Can I just say, as a hiring manager, as somebody who's been a hiring manager in a Fortune 100, you bet your bottom dollar, ePortfolio makes a difference in how I am evaluating a candidate. Again, we are going from hypothetical skill statements or past experiences to actual work product that I can review. Now, there's certainly industries where ePortfolio just is, it's harder to put together. It doesn't exist. It's not the same. For my industry, which has historically been learning and talent development, where I can look at deliverables and see those things, the answer is absolutely. And I think the better that we do on our students' behalf to, the theme for today, articulating the skills that they've developed through their program. I do believe, like, just hear me heart to heart here, I do believe students are developing excellent skills in your programs. I think they're doing a terrible job of articulating it. And so I think that the role you all play in both helping them articulate it and helping them demonstrate it in both storytelling, in an audio format of storytelling, or in a narrative version written as storytelling, and in an e-portfolio where you're bringing that to the table and showing your work. I think your students, should you help them do that, will have a one-up on students from other schools or other applicants to a job when they can bring that kind of resource to the table.
And Matthew, if I can just add one thing, one of the things I've seen really kind of grow over just the past few years is this idea of a test task, right? So not only are you going to go through the interview process as a new hire, you actually have to do something as a test task. I really would encourage those of you with local employer partnerships and, maybe the big industries in your area, ask them what their test task is. What are you doing to screen applicants early on or midway through a process? And how might you be able to use that to actually get students practice? So even if they don't have the e-portfolio, or maybe your institution's not to e-portfolio level yet, or not ready to go in the comprehensive learner and employment record, you at least have some artifacts, and they're getting some practice in developing the kind of artifacts that they would need to get that first job.
Thank you. This is an interesting observation and then kind of question for both of you from Dan. It's I infer a correlation between durable skills development and socioeconomic privilege. Typically, these skills are developed over longer time spans and with more personal interaction than building of perishable skills, which can be transferred in boot camp environments and the like. Do you agree that there's an equity gap in who has access to durable skills education? And if so, how can we close that gap?
It's great.
Ooh, I'm so glad that you grabbed that question, because I was going to ask if we could go into that. I hinted at this a moment ago. I feel compelled by this conversation explicitly. And I'm usually speaking to L&D professionals, to employers. So let me say how I answer it for that audience, is that if you looked at, even down to your learning management system, who has access to courses that developed durable skills versus, because literally those are segmented, right? And those are segmented by things like exemption status or by level in the organization. And so if we looked at that just hardcore objectively, we would find the courses that are have an outcome of durable skills are almost always skewed towards populations that have a socioeconomic advantage. And those who are working the front lines, who are non-exempt employees, are going to have access to much more, here's how you perform this task, here's how you use the system, here's how you follow this process. And so I am absolutely convinced that we play a part, L&D professionals, in how we establish access to courses and materials. And and I would say there's been a hard turn in business circles as a response in the aughts towards ROI articulation of training initiatives. And what happened as a result was that anything that was considered superfluous got skinnied out of content. And so even in the moments where you're developing perishable skills, anything that looked contextual, that felt superfluous, that was quite frankly durable or semi-durable, got stripped out of the courses to say, here is how you develop the task or do the task easier, quicker. And so I absolutely believe there is a correlation between socioeconomic privilege and access to durable skill development.
And I think Dan just, I agree as well. And I think the other thing on the higher ed side, I think it's kind of twofold, and it's not just on the higher ed side. When we think about boot camps and perishable skills development, I hope that we are looking for high quality boot camps and skills development programs that are actually still developing the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that are needed to move forward. So that's one small piece of the puzzle, right? Not just skills development boot camp, but a high quality skills development program is going to also hit on some dispositions that are needed to be able to execute on those skills. So that's one part of the puzzle. The other piece is, and this is for me why stackability and all learning counts becomes so important, because if we have those and we can tell the learner who takes that program, you just earned 9 credit hours toward your associate's degree or 9 credit hours toward your next credential. And that credential is designed in a way to meet the needs of working adult learners, and it is designed with the right sets of supports around them. We can get more of our learners who may have just opted into that quick fix to actually have access to a broader array of programs that can get them to the degree.
Sorry, none of us had done that before, right? Spoken when we're muted. I think we have like just a couple more minutes, and I think maybe one question here. It's a bit of a different line of thinking, but what about international students? This was asked earlier. You know, international students have specific kinds of needs as do other types of students, but like, what are their unique needs? And have you seen institutions responding to their career development asks, if you will?
We predominantly right now are working with employers in the US, but we still have international students who you know are working toward that. And I think one of the things that we've seen that's gone well, honestly, is a few institutions early on looking at earned admissions policies. And so looking at alternative ways to be able to accept our students who maybe come from a country where they don't have access to transcripts, that sort of thing. Looking at not only language supports, but localized supports. So most, you know, institutions might be online, but what are kind of those local connections that can help bring that forward? I think those are probably two of the more promising things, is like looking at earned admissions so that we can provide pathways and access to those learners, but also then looking at the set of supports that are most needed. This is another plug for competencies. In what ways is your institution providing pathways to validate the competencies and skills that international learner already brings to the table, so they don't have to repeat something in your institution that they've already been able to demonstrate? And that's where I think a really strong prior learning assessment strategy can go a long way to help those learners.
Love it. Thank you, Lisa. And thank you, Matthew. We're going to wrap up here. Again, thank you, attendees, for joining us today. Thank you for your questions. No, we did not get to all of them. I think we got to most of the broader themes. You all will get the slides from this webinar, as well as the recording that'll be emailed to you. So again, thank you, Matthew and Lisa. And attendees, have a wonderful afternoon wherever you may be. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.